Well, one of the prominent political figures attending that summit was the former Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison. I spoke to him earlier and asked him why he wanted to be there.
I thought, when I received the invitation, there was an opportunity to cover a large sort of territory of issues, but do it from a particular perspective, and a perspective I share. And that is that our Western civilisation was grounded on a set of values which drew from a Judeo-Christian heritage. And it was important that we sort of rediscover how those can continue to be applied across so many different aspects of life. And frankly, not just in politics. It goes from everything from how we raise our kids to how we live in communities and have functional communities. And of course, there are political issues, but, entrepreneurship, enterprise, all of these things, learning. It's been a very diverse set of topics that the conference has touched on. It's been very rewarding.
You did do a lot of business with Boris Johnson, be it on trade or indeed security issues. Did you think it was a shame when he was forced out of office?
Well, I thought Boris was making an enormous contribution to British life. Boris sort of returned sovereignty to the United Kingdom, at least in my view, and I suspect in the view of many. But I found his instinctive response on global economic issues, global security issues, one that very much lined up with the way I was looking at things. So, we were fellow travellers on quite a bit. We both went through a pandemic, very different experiences for both of us, and tried to support each other during that process. Particularly both him and Sajid Javid were very helpful to Australia at one particular point, and I'll always be grateful for that. But it was a very tight, trusting relationship, which it always should be, and I think always largely has. And as John Howard reminded us today, his relationship with Tony Blair was also a very positive and a very close one.
And Ms Morrison, you talked about something that was an experience for all global leaders, which was handling the pandemic. Now, in Australia, I think it was viewed that you'd done a really good job and you had managed to keep the mortality rate very low. We are having a COVID inquiry in this country right now. I don't know how much you've heard about it or read about it, but what it's exposing is complete dysfunction at the heart of Boris Johnson's government. He himself describing the operation around him as a, quote, orgy of narcissism and saying it had to stop. Were you shocked by some of this?
Well, I haven't been following that closely. What I do know is this, is that managing the response to COVID was uncharted territory for all of us. And I remember those early months in particular very, very well. It was a time of great uncertainty. People were very, very fearful. In the Northern Hemisphere, it hit you first in your winter. It hit us in a summer. And, I think there are differences there. We moved very quickly to close our borders. And I think that was probably one of the most important decisions we made. I mean, we didn't get our response perfect. It was a shared response between our state governments and our federal government. Some of our states took the lockdowns too far, I think. But, we can all look back in hindsight and be, as they say in the United States, Monday morning quarterbacks. But, if people weren't there and having to make the decision, we can all have views about it later. And I think that's what will come out. And that's okay. We're transparent representative democracies, and that's all part of the process.
Labour in the UK are looking at the Australian election and looking at what Albanese did to defeat you. What can they learn? What can Labour here learn from the Australian election?
Well, I hope they don't learn much at all for the sake of my Tory colleagues in the UK. I mean, they ran a very vicious campaign against me over a very long period of time. But look, I'm not here to do retrospectives on elections. I mean, in politics, you win some, you lose some. You don't get bitter about it. You're thankful for the service that you're able to provide your country. I certainly am. I love my country, and I had a great honour to be both a Prime Minister for almost 4 years and served in Cabinet for around 9. So that's a pretty great opportunity. I'm very thankful for it. But, at the end of the day, we've been in government for 3 terms. It's not often that governments get a 4th term in politics, and people make changes.
And final thought, Mr Morrison, if I may. You talk about 3 terms. The Conservative Party have been in for 4 elections now, 4 terms. What advice, let me put it another way, what advice would you give to Rishi Sunak to try and overturn that Labour poll lead here and win a 5th election? Or is he done?
Well, look, I'm not close enough to know the politics here in the UK, but what I do know is you always got to keep looking ahead. You don't win the next election the same way you won the last one. I think that's a pretty obvious thing in politics, and you've got to keep charting out a positive agenda when you're in government. I mean, oppositions basically sit there and hopefully they believe the government will lose the election, and that's often what occurs. So, from the Tories' point of view here in the UK, it really is about repression, renewal, positive agendas, and connecting with what are the biggest issues that people are facing. And I have no doubt here, that's cost of living crisis. I mean, just picking up, talking to people here, issues around housing affordability, those sorts of things, they're very real issues back in Australia as well. And I think the post-COVID economy has got its big challenges, and people have got to make a decision about who's going to be best to manage those challenges.
And I've got
in Australia, I'd just say in Australia, before the last election, the Labor Party made a whole bunch of promises about how energy prices would come down and, real wages would go up, and none of that's happened. People will tell you what they want to tell you, but when they get into government, sometimes those things don't happen. And I think that's what we've seen in Australia. So don't believe the hype is what I'd suggest to the UK public when you hear a lot of bold claims about what Labor might do here. And obviously the government has got to put its case forward about how it can deal with those really, really challenging issues. And they've got a lot of experienced people to do it, I'm sure, including Rishi.